All right, well, welcome to our webinar, an executive panel discussion on supply chain materials and logistics disruptions. They certainly abound in today's world. So we're here today to talk with the PAC Rim and North American focus. And we're part of the supply chain special interest group, supply chain experts globally from around the world of the Society for the Advancement of Consulting. And also we have today with us our Association for Supply Chain Management, APIC's Inland Empire chapter attendees. So welcome to everyone. And we're going to start off by, I'm going to have each panel member introduce themselves briefly, and then we will get started with what we see going on in today's world as far as these disruptions, what we can do about it, and feel free to start sending in questions on the chat box and the Q&A area, and I will have folks take them as we go. And so I'm sure you have plenty of questions. I know there's plenty of disruptions out there. So with that said, I'm Lisa Anderson, and I'm president of LMA Consulting. I'm also an executive director of the Society for the Advancement of Consulting, and I happen to be president of APIC's Inland Empire chapter. And so I'm a former vice president of operations and supply chain for a mid-market manufacturer, and I've been consulting now for the last 16 years, working with clients on just these types of topics. So next we'll have Diane. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Diane Garcia, and I am president of Lorraine Consulting. I'm located out in Portland, Oregon in the US. And I would say my background mainly has been exactly in this topic. So how to help clients with their material shortages and really the overall supply chain and disruptions that occur in the supply chain. My technical background, my degree is in supply chain management, but as I've gone through different projects and different positions in companies, I've used all different types of systems. So I have lots of experience within ERP softwares, as well as supplemental softwares that connect into an ERP system. So I know a lot of my clients today are working on ramping up their systems and how can they improve upon their business processes. I'm sure we'll chat about all of that and how the systems can help support us. But yeah, nice to be here.
All right, great, thank you. All right, so next up we have, let's stick with the US. I didn't mention that I am from Claremont, California, so focused on Southern California, which is definitely heavy in supply chain management. We are the conduit between Asia Pacific and the rest of the North American area. Our ports bring in 40% of everything that comes into the US, and we're actually very heavy in manufacturing too, which is a little known fact. So okay, next up, also in the US is Dr. Karen Wilson Starks. So Karen, do you want to give us a brief introduction?
Certainly. I'm Dr. Karen Wilson Starks, and I'm from Colorado Springs, Colorado. I'm president of Trans Leadership Incorporated, which stands for Leadership Transformations. I have been consulting with executive leaders for more than 30 years in all different industries. However, I work most often in manufacturing. And so I'm usually working with large manufacturing organizations or mid-size. So over the last year or so, I've actually been working more with the mid-size companies in the manufacturing space. So what I'm bringing is a leadership lens, and what I focus on is the kind of culture that's necessary to get the results that the organization is looking for. I also work with high performance teams, helping them to be more effective, and also do some executive recruitment as far as executive selection and development. So a lot of what I'll be sharing today is what is the necessary leadership in order to deal with the kinds of times that we're talking about.
All right, well, thank you, Karen. And then next up we have Evan Bulmer from Australia.
Thank you, Lisa. Yes, I'm Evan Bulmer. I come from Adelaide, Australia. I work with privately held businesses my manufacturing comes from the fact that my dad owned a manufacturing business and I worked in it as a young lad. And 25 years of doing this, I've worked in a lot of different industries. And I think it'll be interesting today with this panel because I think Australia's supply chain issues are very, very different to what the US is facing. And I think that contrast will be interesting today.
Absolutely. Very good. All right. And then also from Australia, but from Brisbane is David Ogilvie.
Thank you, Lisa. It's nice to be here. Thanks for having us. As Lisa mentioned, I'm from Brisbane, Australia, but my client base covers most of the PAC rim, so that includes most of Asia and New Zealand. I've been consulting for manufacturing firms and distribution companies for over 23 years now. And prior to that, similar to Evan, I grew up in a family business and we owned a multiple of different businesses, including manufacturing and retail. I come to the panel with a similar background to Diana's in that I also work in the ERP space. So I'm very heavy in making sure that the technology that supports manufacturing firms is in place and they can extract the value that they need. And so I agree with Evan, this will be a very interesting discussion because I think there are a number of different dynamics at play.
All right. Well, so welcome to the panel, and we will jump right in. So I'll kick it off. I certainly work with clients that range from small and medium-sized family-owned businesses to multi-billion-dollar global enterprises. And absolutely every single one of them has in common currently the fact that they have material logistics disruptions and shortages and extended lead time. So it's causing quite the havoc in clients currently. So it's certainly in the US anyhow. So Diane, what are you seeing in your clients? What types of disruptions are occurring? Are they occurring because of the Suez Canal, because of the LA Long Beach ports, because of the Texas freeze, or what are you hearing?
Well, I think the answer is all of the above. So I work with multiple clients across different industries, and I would say the overall theme, I would say for the last few months has been key shortages, key suppliers, like Lisa mentioned, have been extending their lead times. I think the surge of demand and pent-up demand that was coming through from the pandemic has taken hold, and so you have a lot of different businesses and companies working to get as much inventory across the globe as quickly as possible, because we just have seen such an upsurge in what our customer and customers need. So it's been an interesting ride, but yes, I would say it's a combination of all of it. Things are stuck, things are waiting, things are lost, things are not made. So I think it's all across the supply chain in every direction.
Well, and that brings up a point is that what I'm seeing in clients is a surge in volume because there's pent up demand. There's a rapid rise in B2B, B2B for small quantity orders, and B2C for sure, because everyone wants things delivered to their front door. I mean, why not? We got used to it during the pandemic. And that's accompanied with a very, suppliers that are tight with capacity and all sorts of problems going on across the board. Actually, I heard today from a supply chain colleague that there is 7 weeks of demand on the water coming to the ports of LA and Long Beach. That's like 7 extra weeks, I should say, of demand, which is outrageous. It's insane. So there's a significant challenges ahead in North America. What are you seeing, Evan, in terms of what's happening in Australia?
Well, I think to your point, lead times have absolutely blown out. So I can sell something today and know damn well I can't deliver it for 4, 6, 8 months. I think what I find interesting in the clients that I'm working with is some are good at communicating this to their customers and keeping in touch, because I think it's a very different environment when you've got a 4, 6, 8 month lead time to manage a customer through a sale process as opposed to, weeks. And I feel, I'm watching a lot of sales drop off, businesses that don't do a good job of communicating this issue consistently. The customer has bought the thing, they want it, they might have some understanding there are issues getting supply, but quite frankly, they don't care. They want their thing, it's up to the business to communicate this. And I think, generally speaking, I'm seeing a poor job done of it in the marketplace that I'm watching. And I think it will send some people broke, no doubt. I mean, in Australia, I think in the US, we've had measures that have slowed the ability to deal with credit issues and deal with businesses that aren't performing. And so we've propped up a few bad ones. I think that fallout is about to happen in terms of, these businesses can't get supply. They're not talking to their customers. The sale is and will evaporate. And, they're going to hit some problems. Conversely, you've got businesses that are a bit more cash strapped, been thinking about this problem for a long time, have resourced themselves with critical materials, communicate well with customers, they're growing. So there's definite winners and losers, and it's quite profound in this marketplace.
Yeah, very, very good point. And what about you, David? What are you seeing in your neck of the woods?
I don't want to sound like a broken record, but obviously we're all suffering very similar symptoms. I would agree. Pardon me. I would agree with Evan that there are going to be some big winners and losers out of this. I would also agree that communication is key. I think one of the key pieces has been that many of the fundamental supply chain kind of business 101 topics have been forgotten over time. And I think, as Warren Buffett famously said around investing, it's not hard to see who's swimming naked when the tide goes out. And I think this is a very similar situation where we are now getting exposed. The rocks in the river, the old inventory management metaphor of rocks in the river, we are now getting the rocks exposed, and we are seeing boats hitting the rocks and having problems. But those companies that have got their supply chain 101 pieces in place are thriving in many ways. If they've got their visibility around information and material and their cash, if they've got the velocity working, if they've got the processes in places, and as Evan mentioned, communicating all of these issues, I think they are doing very well. A classic example is one of the guys that lives in the unit block that I live in just recently bought a car. And the car industry has had a lot of supply problems over time. He was kept well informed by the manufacturer. He was watching the car being made throughout the process. He was kept informed the whole time. So the visibility for him was paramount, and he's a very happy customer as a result. So, companies that are doing those 101 pieces well are thriving.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's where we're going to go next and maybe we just talk about one idea at a time so that we.
One, David. I just want to come off David's comment about the car industry. Sure. So, new car, and depending on the manufacturer, I mean, I've got manufacturers in the car industry saying you're not going to have a car for 9 months. Like, we've yanked what we're going to send to Australia, we're sending it somewhere else. So they're just not coming. Now, if that business can't pivot around used cars or servicing and other forms of income to compensate for the fact that I just cannot sell what I do not have. You with me? I can't be profitable. So, strategy is fast, mate. I've got to react to the fact that the manufacturer tells me today, you're not having cars. Well, all right, what do I do now that's different to what I was going to do? Because if I keep waiting for new car sales, I will go broke.
That's right.
So I think strategy is like fast these days because the environment shifts on me so quick. I think I've got a supply chain sorted out and then it's ripped off me. And I'll tell you something else that's happening in Australia is the Yanks, you guys, you've got a supply chain issue. You're buying our stuff at a premium. We can't even get our own shit anymore.
That's right.
You guys are too powerful in your the money and your dollar. And
we're happy to buy it all up.
Yeah, you're ripping it off us. So the wholesaler's loving it, but the rest of the marketplace suffers. It's, you know, those with the deepest pockets are winning this game, I feel.
Yeah, well, it has proven that, well, there's several key points to what we've all been discussing here. So one of them is it certainly proves that cash is king, and if we have reserves and the ability to dip into our cash reserves, first of all, some folks have simply survived the pandemic because they had cash reserves, and more importantly, now it allows you to take advantage of that. And I know, Evan, that's like a key piece to your business from your financial background.
If demand is up, and it is, everyone's saying demand for goods is up, supply is down. The smart businesses have to be price taking, don't they? And the dumb ones are not. Dumb ones are not. They haven't adjusted their margins, and so they're crippling themselves.
Well,
Lisa,
good point.
I'd like to weigh in.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Karen. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to weigh in on a little bit on this conversation as well, because some of what Evan is saying is really interesting to me because of what I'm seeing with some of my clients. So let me mention, I'm working a lot with clients who are operating in the construction space, and they do very specialized work that requires a lot of skilled craftsmen, and they're often they're subcontractors to the larger general contractor individuals. And through the pandemic, they were working the entire time, so demand was high in terms of what they were producing and what they were offering. And so what's happening now is, because of the supply chain issues, sometimes they're not able to get the materials they need quickly enough. The sale has already been made. And what's happening at the GC level is there are a lot of penalties that are being imposed instead of being, I would say, reasonable in the negotiation process about the times, that we're in. So the communication piece is absolutely huge, and it's absolutely critical. And so I'm finding that I have to advise my executive leaders in the construction industry how to have the right conversations with the general contractors, and how to negotiate for the timelines that are necessary, and to really pay attention to their contracts, because it looks as though some GCs have started a line of business, which is to profit from penalties as opposed to what normally would be the case. And I think what's surprising is that these are people who've had really deep and good relationships for many years. And I think they're shocked that this is how they're being treated. So that's sort of the external part with the partners. And then internal, what I'm finding is that the efficiencies with which, let's say, my clients have to operate are really increased. They cannot lose materials on a job site or misplace them or anything like that, because to get those materials again takes so long, it would jeopardize the job. So it really does require a lot more efficiency internally as well. Yeah,
Absolutely true. It relates back to your ability to collaborate and communicate up and down your supply chain. I certainly am seeing, well, every client has suppliers that's extending lead times. And the question is, who will be prioritized to get the particular stock that's needed, or the particular product that's needed? And is the whole supply chain going to start over ordering, causing no one to have supply? Or, are we going to have proactive conversations to try to level that playing field out, is what several of my clients are doing. So it's, to your point, Karen, it's like a big piece to this puzzle. David, what are you, so we talked about cash. Now we're talking about communication and collaboration. Do you want to add something to the communication and collaboration, David, or another critical point?
A couple of things there, I guess. So technology can help with some of that communication, but at the end of the day, it comes down to the relationships that you have. The relationships both internally and externally in an organisation actually have a really big impact on how the supply chain operates. And it can be as simple as how your AP department operates and deals with their suppliers. If they are constantly screwing them on time all the time and making them wait for their payments and so forth, when materials get short, those suppliers are making strategic decisions about who they actually sell that to. So if you've been a customer that's been regularly paying on time and build good relationships with your suppliers, there's a strong chance that, no guarantee, of course, but there's a strong chance that you can be prioritised. So that relationship and consultative and communicative relationship piece is very, very important.
Well, I think that's a good point, David. And what I hear is that because the pandemic was such a noteworthy event, I mean, you'd have to, like, there is not going to be a person in the world, one would think, that hasn't heard about the pandemic happening. So something of that big of significance tends to carry larger weight going forward, even disproportionately larger of a weight. So what that means is that if clients that have customers that are taking care of them, even though, or suppliers that are taking care of them, even though they are struggling right now, it's going to be long remembered. And the reverse is true too. So I think it's like, I think Evan brought this up earlier, is the winners and the losers are going to, it's the opportunity is now to stand out from the crowd. So, and David, you brought up technology. So Diane, I would like, as the third, another third principle here is the ability to gain visibility and utilize technology. What have you found from that arena?
Yeah, I guess I just want to comment on the communication piece too, though, before I jump into the
Go
technology.
for it.
So I do think that what I'm seeing, and I have a unique perspective because I work with clients in the manufacturing space and the distribution space that are smaller in size and then also mid-size to larger. So what I think I'm seeing is that you have the larger end of the clients and companies who are working on, how do I align my demand? How do I know what I need? How do I know what to purchase? So we have to implement these strategic processes like a SIOP process, a sales and inventory operations planning process, so we can really get a handle on what kind of forecast we see so that we know what to do. And then down the chain of the supply chain, you start to see these smaller suppliers who are just overwhelmed with the amount of work that they have, and how do they prioritize, but not only prioritize, but how do they expand so they can support all of this demand? So then you have them integrating and implementing their systems to their key customers, and more importantly, how do they maybe get more sophisticated business processes, more communication, because it comes down to, can I tell them what am I anticipating? Can I tell them I'm going to be late? Because I may not even know that. I may not have the visibility that maybe taking on this extra demand has caused impacts to this production line or this particular product or this particular customer. So really the communication is key, but it's also being able to figure out, how do you know what the impact is so that you can communicate that across the supply chain.
It's the visibility, it's the velocity of that communication. It's how quickly that communication, that information can be transferred across the different parties within the supply chain. That's to making things work. So the sooner you know, the sooner you can make a decision.
And I think there's just no more room for error. I think the pandemic highlighted that we had an issue. I think, like Lisa mentioned, I know for sure that there are orders that are above our demand, and we're implementing buffer stock along the supply chain just because we have been burned with shortages in one case, and so now we're over ordering in other cases. So I know that's happening across the different industries and companies, but I do think that there's just no more error for miscommunication. And so, like Evan was saying, there's winners and losers. So if you're a supplier that can keep up, you're doing very well, but there are lots of companies out there that just have not figured out how to build their systems for this visibility and also their communication for that visibility.
There's something I want to say about that too, Diana, because I think it's really important, which is this: when you're working in a specialty area, I think one of the things that goes on is there may not be very many suppliers for whatever that specialty item is. Maybe it's a certain kind of a steel, for example, and maybe there are only a couple of people that produce that type of steel. And the company is getting overwhelmed with the orders, so they cannot easily even find people who know how to do the work. And so even if they have some new systems in place or better systems in place, because there's a high level of skill that's required in order to produce what they're producing, those people just don't exist in the volume in which they need it.
Huge topic right now is like the talent shortage and the specialized industries. We just don't have the people where we need them. We don't have the talent where we need them, or they're leaving for better opportunities. So I think, that's another key point that has been very apparent in the last few months over the pandemic.
We've got a massive shortage of people here because we've closed the borders and we're just not allowing anybody to come into the country. And so therefore there's massive labour shortages throughout the country in lots and lots of areas.
Our farmers can't get their food off the paddock, their crops off the paddock, because they were terribly reliant on backpackers coming to this country and working. They're not here. No one's there to pick the crops. Yeah. This is a massive problem for them. And some of the some of our industries have, predominantly service China, and China's just stopped buying. So they're getting absolutely spanked.
Well, we're seeing the same. I was actually on a TV interview earlier this week about just that topic, the shortages and material issues in the food supply chain, or at least that was the focus. And the lack of people is affecting every aspect of the supply chain. And in the US, it's depends on the type of position, but there are people who make less money that have been on unemployment, that perhaps don't really want to work versus making money on unemployment. So there's that problem. And there's a lot of chaos and conversation surrounding that aspect, as well as just, people have taken the pandemic as a way to maybe I'll retire. I think I'll change careers, everything you could think of. I've seen my clients have that experience. So there's definitely a significant labor shortage out there right now. So talent.
So the cattle, the thing you've got to think about as a business is, and I think Dr. Karen mentioned this, it's culture. If you've got a strong culture, if your people believe in your vision and where you're taking your business, they are far more likely to help you find the talent and bring it into your organisation than the other. So I feel like culture can solve a lot of these issues of talent shortages, because businesses need to attract talent to it. And when there's shortage, they need to even be better at attracting talent. So again, these pillars of communication, culture, are critical issues, I think, going forward in an environment like this. There is good talent out there. It does want to work. I don't necessarily agree that that the boost in unemployment benefits in this country is causing that much problem. You know what I mean?
Only at the lower
our unemployment's down around 5%. You're getting down to the unemployable. So therefore, attracting talent, you're no longer dragging it off the street, you're ripping it out of someone else's organisation.
But again, Evan, this gets back to my comment about it being business 101, because at the end of the day, these are things that businesses could or should be doing all of the time, not just because there's a supply chain problem, or just not because there's a pandemic. Good, sound, successful businesses are doing these things every day. They have the right metrics in place. They understand their visibility. They understand their velocity. They understand where their vulnerabilities are. They should be doing this every day.
But David, when the tide went out, they were wearing clothes.
That's correct. That's exactly right.
That's right. So you're right. So far here, we've talked about a lot of the basics that David brought up. We have cash. So if you've been proactively managing your cash, or if you haven't, you better start immediately. But we talked about cash. We talked about collaboration and communication, proactive communication. We talked about technology, and we've been talking about talent. So those thus far, these are some key topics that the people who are more the executives that were more prepared, and as David said, managing those basics up front are faring better, to be sure. However, I'm also seeing those that are rapidly scaling up their abilities to handle those areas. They still have a good fighting chance, and they're making some headway. So, it's by no means all lost, but if you delay any further, it will be all lost, I think.
And let me say something else too, Lisa, about the culture piece, because I think that one of the things that I'm seeing is in areas where it was difficult to recruit anyway before the pandemic, and it's even more difficult now sort of like in the middle, hopefully nearing the end of the pandemic, recruitment is even more challenging. And so some of the clients that I know, they've had to work so hard during the pandemic and work extra hours to the point where it has affected the culture somewhat adversely. And so people their tongues are hanging out. And to what extent do they really want to invite other people to come onto that fast train becomes another issue that the company is dealing with, because some of the workforce is feeling burned out because of the volume they've had to take on, because of the shortages they've had to deal with, and so on. So attracting talent is affected, by that piece as well.
Well, I have to say, the most successful clients I have focus more attention on retaining top talent and developing the top talent and being an organization that people would want to join. And then to some degree, the attracting talent happens by default. So I totally agree with that. And if there's an opportunity, like every single client I've ever worked with is that you are most likely undervaluing someone at your company. Find that person, because by all means do not have many opportunities right now, and you have to utilize all the strengths you can. And who isn't more interested in doing more work that will have direct value to the bottom line? So it's going to motivate and encourage your employees. Evan, looked like you were going to say something. Did you want to say something?
I'm interested in what you're saying. I when you talk about a business being under pressure, like Karen's talking about, it is hard to manage the energy levels of people and what have you. But I think the best managers can do that. They do understand they've pushed a team, and so they do give them time out. They do recognise that, and I think that goes a long way to appeasing the people in your organisation, just to be recognised for the efforts they're putting in and given a bit of space to breathe. I don't think they need a lot, but you can't just keep driving them into the ground. It won't work.
Absolutely.
No, it's very true.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel exhausted lately working with clients because they have so many problems working through all this stuff that it makes even your support folks exhausted trying to help you through these periods of time. So definitely keep that in mind, and how you can like Evan said, is very doable. And Karen, it's in a way, as David said, is leadership 101, right? So how do we help?
Yeah, please, thank you, and well done. Seem to go a long way.
Yeah, and what I would call
you,
really a positive leadership culture. And so often people go to the side of negativity instead of the positive pieces, instead of recognizing what's going well and calling that out and acknowledging that. They often want to bring out the whip, but the people are already tired from being just whipped from the work itself. And so you really don't need to bring out any whips. And I think that the point too is, it is so much easier if you use the right leadership strategies to keep people motivated, inspired, and working, who already know how to do the work. It is really difficult to bring in new people when you're running fast, and to ramp them up and to get them at the right skill level. And especially if you're in anything specialized, that's hard to find that talent off the ground. So I think that therefore it's sort of like maybe we're in a time where we have to think about how do we preserve the goodness of what we have, rather than back in the olden days. Like I remember when in the US, you would buy a new car every year. And right now we're in a season, you better keep the old one running, because we're really not I'm speaking metaphorically, we're not in a place where, those cars are readily available. I'm not talking about the car industry, but just metaphorically about people and talent.
Well, that's true for them too, but
Metaphorically and in real life.
yeah, that's right. Go ahead,
I have
Diane.
a question for the panel related to that kind of ideas. How do we preserve what quality we had? So I'm curious what you're seeing, where with the pandemic and not being able to get materials and supplies as needed out of certain countries, have you seen clients shift their supply chain, and are they having disruptions because of those quality issues? Or maybe we haven't even got to that phase of the post-pandemic, is that coming, since we're doing some switching of sources and we're not quite aware of these quality issues that could arise in the next month?
I'm definitely seeing that happen. And as far as the Association for Supply Chain Management webinar series, we had a guest on recently who is fascinating, I forget what he calls himself, but like a political analyst that was talking about different areas of the world. And right now, like, people are switching from, let's say, China to India because there's more more in common and more less risk, if you will. On the other hand, if they have a product that's not too overwhelmingly difficult to ship, and it's not a commodity product, there's a lot of opportunity, like for people moving to Latin America and those types of areas that serve the North American market. So I'm seeing definitely people moving their supply chain. Certainly it's causing some additional disruption or items to manage, if you will. And so I'm starting to see that happen, because people are also realizing not only is there risk from the pandemic, but there's future risks and different types of risks. And they may not even have had all their supply coming from one place in the past, and they realize that's a problem too. Go ahead, David.
Sorry, Diane. At least here, there's a lot of talk about shifting sourcing and those sorts of things. But I think one of the difficulties they have, if you want to shift your source, you need to go and have a look at the factory that you're shifting to. You need to go and see the quality of the product they're producing, particularly when they do their first couple of batches for you and so forth. You want to go and, before you dispatch it, and incur all the costs and things. And the fact that we can't travel anymore, we can't go overseas to those factories. And if you do, you've got the additional cost, at least in Australia, of having to go into quarantine at your own cost at the hotel for a minimum of 2 weeks. And those sorts of things just don't provide the landscape to make that as easy as it once was.
Wow,
so
that's
while
tough.
the desire is there to move, I'm not sure the mechanics are available to us to necessarily do that.
Well, and I would bring up that I think that's relates in my mind to our ability to be resilient right now, because we do not have the same level of lockdown that you're talking about. And so I'm seeing clients on the road again, and they are absolutely traveling to suppliers like quickly, because the next topic that I would like to address here, because I know that we all deal with this, and I think if you think about our progression here with cash, communication and collaboration, technology, talent, the next thing is, and it relates to all of these, is innovation. What I'm seeing the clients that are most successful do to manage through this material disruption is innovate. And innovation doesn't have to be like creating a new material. That's possible, but it could be simpler than that. It could just be, let's try a similar material, or with someone with similar properties. And one of our clients is doing that right now, and they're finding ways to be directionally correct where it won't affect the customer negatively, but they can gain supply, and they will end up succeeding, whereas the rest of the industry suffers. So I think
a good example of that, Lisa, is Toyota. Because Toyota did a couple of things. They saw this chip shortage coming, and they invested in chips. And they also thought past the first part of the supplier and started to innovate, to the point that they redesigned the housing that the chip sits in so that it could take chips from multiple manufacturers. Right.
Yeah.
So that's them thinking through that whole process. And I just don't, as you say, to the point of innovating, I don't think there's enough people thinking in that domain about how do we innovate, how do we pivot, how do we change exactly what we have at the moment to cater for these different risks that are potentially available to us. And I think, they're a really, really good example.
I think that's a great example, because that's exactly what's going to be happening here. The chip shortage is not going to be solved anytime soon, even though they're building like a new plant in Arizona, a new plant in
You
Taiwan,
don't
I
turn that
think.
on straight away, right? That doesn't
Yeah.
happen straight away.
Yeah, you don't just snap your fingers and have a new plant. I don't think so. But what else? Who else would like to talk to something related to
Yeah.
innovation?
I'd like to speak about that as well, because the angle that I'm thinking about is what I'm going to call resourcefulness. Because with some of the clients that I have, and they really care about the quality of their products and what they're producing. They have a lot of pride in their work, and some things are difficult to obtain at the moment. And so what they've started doing is looking at items that normally would be kind of like a surplus, but something you might throw away, and figuring out how to manufacture those pieces to create what's needed. It's still of the right quality, but it really does require an innovative mindset and resourcefulness to use what you have, rather than to, think about, okay, I've got to go and get what I'm used to getting, when you really might be able to build what you need with what you've got. And that requires a different mindset. So I am seeing that with my clients right now.
I love the MacGyver approach. I almost wrote a book on that once for manufacturing, because I just love it. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, after all, whatever you have it now. So
Use
it's
it.
not a
Yeah,
bad
use
idea.
it. And these are creative people who are used to making custom things anyway. So they're already sort of mentally wired for custom solution. They just haven't had to apply it in this way.
Yeah. All right. Well, then, now, if you have questions, not that we're all knowing, but we certainly have, we are the top global consultants on in the supply chain. So we're happy to answer your questions. With that said, then, Diane had a good question here. So she's asking, like, how long we think that these disruptions will last. And I'll kick off that topic by saying that according to the head of the LA and Long Beach ports, there's no expectation that one aspect of this supply chain puzzle is going to be caught up even until 2022 sometime. So, the busy season is going to start to support the holiday season. And now there is not even a busy season anymore. It's just all one peak season. So that's just the LA and Long Beach ports. The Suez Canal, when that crisis happened, people diverted and went down different paths, and then it created additional changes to the supply chain and disruptions and confusion. The Texas storm, who's to say what storm will be next, or what hurricane, or who knows what will be the next disruption from that we cannot control from that point of view. So I think we're in just a new era where we can expect continual disruptions, and we probably, unfortunately, cannot think that there's X date and everything will be fine. So we have to think about how to be resilient. That's my thinking. Who would like
Lisa,
to
on
Go
that
ahead.
topic of other risks, I think one of the risks that many people either don't want to think about or have not been thinking about, but I believe, and I've been talking to my clients about, is the prospect of war.
Of what?
Of war and war
Oh,
with
war.
China.
Yes.
Right. So,
Well,
China,
like you said,
China has been very, very aggressive towards Australia. It's trying to use us as an example to the rest of the world and so forth. And, for Australian manufacturers who are drawing a lot of their supply from China, if they get aggressive and we need to defend ourselves, then their supply is going to be cut off. And I'm not sure enough people are thinking about that prospect or that risk.
well, according to this expert and to the expert that we had on the Association for Supply Chain Management webinar series, which I would highly recommend. It's complimentary, and I will put the URL in the chat box so that you can listen to it. But he basically said there is heightened risk for sure with China, not necessarily with for example, the US or even Australia, but he was saying somehow or another, there's some kind of a conflict that will go on likely in in Asia. And then there's
Well,
India.
it'll be Taiwan. They'll invade Taiwan.
Exactly, Taiwan. So there's a lot of, you have to think immediately, where are you getting your supplies from and who is supplying them, and what are you going to do? Is you better be thinking about it now, because if not, you may not be in business long. Now, let's hope we can avoid a war. But after that webinar, one of my board members texted me and said, "War," in all caps. Like he was like, absolutely horrified, but it's not something we want to think about. But it could be that little in quotes, right? Little uprisings and conflicts occur, but these little things are big wherever they are. They're big to them, and they're big impacts in the supply chain. So it's not a crazy notion that you bring up, David, unfortunately.
No, in fact,
David, what do you reckon?
is that the political climate is really important. So it's not just the business climate and what's going on from a business perspective. It's who are your partners and what divided loyalties might they have in terms of the politics in their countries of origin and how that affects wherever it is that we're operating. So I think that clients are not used to thinking as much about those political realities. They're not used to considering that dynamic in how to move forward. And so I think when you're thinking about in the boardrooms and so on, you have to take into account a much wider range of perspectives in terms of who you decide to partner with and when, and what could be the implications.
And Karen, that gets back to my concept of visibility, right? You need the visibility down the supply chain. And many executives are looking to their suppliers. They're only going one tier down the chain rather than looking 2 and 3 tiers down the chain. Because, okay, the supplier you're buying from today may have a good relationship and may have a good political and so forth. But the one that they're buying from, or the third tier down the chain, may be a different kettle of fish. It may be different. And you need to understand where those political tensions and those sorts of things come from. So that's that visibility down the chain that I find is really important.
Excellent point.
It also could be not even the political tensions, but it could just be that somebody down the chain that's got a critical material of some sort is a baby boomer, and they've said, you know what, this is like enough, and they decide that they are going to retire and close the business. And then do you have a backup, or are you doing something about that? Because that's I'm seeing that happening as well.
And I think these new slavery laws are going to change the way supply chain managers manage this, because there's going to be a greater responsibility on them to be accountable for 2 and 3 tier supplier performance, which hasn't been around at the moment. Now that's only fresh, it's only new, and so those requirements aren't being enforced heavily at the moment. But it makes sense to me that the way these regulators and so forth work, they will start to be stronger around their commitments of those, and that will become a bigger compliance issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Really good point. So Diane, what do you think about that? And when do you think this will end, if you think it will end?
I would agree with the expert that we're going to see this well into 2022. I think not only with just the amount of lead times we typically have seen, but you're saying exactly what I'm seeing is that lead times are extending. So if we're seeing shortages or have been seeing shortages, we're going to be living with them, and there is no slowing down. And like you mentioned, the peak season has been throughout 2021. So we will not, we're not going to finish this up in this year by any means. We'll see it into 2022. And I'm actually on a board, the Apex Portland chapter, and I work with, I have board members who are all within the supply chain at different companies, industries. Lumber has gone crazy. You can't get lumber for any reasonable price here. So, what they're telling me and what we've discussed at some of our meetings has been that they are not seeing signs of slowing down. They're just trying to work with what they have, and trying to ramp up as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and actually that relates back to the pulp and paper industry, and there was like a lot of conversation going on about shortages of supply and inflation, right? That's the other thing that's coming out of this, at least in the US area is doesn't look like inflation is going to be going away anytime soon. There's oil and natural gas, like complications. It's like a whole nother conversation on that topic, but basically it's, that's used in a lot of products that we use, that we produce. And so I don't know, it's going to be like something to navigate all of this.
So there's another risk or vulnerability I think companies need to be across, and that is we have a number of generations of managers in organizations that haven't managed in these times. And this is one of the cases where this kind of pays off, having a little bit of grey hair and having lived through inflationary times before. Because the reality is there are a number of generations who do not know how to manage in inflationary or difficult times.
Well, it's a really good point. And Evan, I know you're like a financial guru in your old life. Do you have thoughts on how to, tip for anyone on how to get through that?
Well, I mean, everyone talks like inflationary times are a bad thing. Inflationary times mean that you can put your prices up reasonably consistently without too much pushback. So to me, understanding your margins and taking the price increases when you can actually be a really profitable environment to exist in.
Yeah, exciting, right?
But
which is why the Reserve Banks, Evan, are trying to get that band of inflation, right? Because that's where inflation is a healthy concept. But if it gets out of those sort of bands and we get back to the sort of the late 80s situation, the Reserve Banks of the world start to manipulate things and they get out of control.
Inflation's a problem if wages growth doesn't go with it.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the bit that will be interesting to watch. But you would think that with unemployment diving in this country like it is, and I think it's happening in the US as well, that wages will have to increase. If wages go with an inflationary environment, I don't think we've got a problem. If inflation goes without wages, yeah, we got a problem. The haves will have more and the have-nots will have less.
Yeah, and I think it's something, it's like David was saying, there's also something to manage in the situation. One is that we shouldn't be afraid to ask for price increases, to be sure. Actually, I was on the phone with a client recently and they said, not like a one-time increase of prices, but they actually had, with every order they received from a key supplier, every single order had an increase. Now, I'm not suggesting that, but that's what they were experiencing. So like Evan said, there's an opportunity to raise prices to make sure you're addressing your margin needs on the positive side. And on the other side of things, you better be working with your suppliers to figure out what might be happening, because if you're not covering for their price increases to you, you're going to have an issue.
That's what I was just thinking about. And I was wondering how people were handling that, because in some of the companies where I work, they have very, thin margins in terms of the type of work that they do. And the sales are happening way in advance. So the work may have been sold 2 years ago, and they're now having to do the work based on the prices from at that time. So if a supplier is raising the rates now, that's the kiss of death, and they don't have a whole lot of margin to play with. So I don't know what the full answer to that is, but I'm wondering what you're seeing and how you're handling that as well.
Well, I'm seeing go ahead, David.
That's what I was saying about the experience of the management in these organisations. There's a lot of young people who haven't grown up and had to manage in those things, and mental mindsets or whatever it happens to be, they may or may not be able to deal with this. So I think it's a risk that people aren't considering enough.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what I noticed is that the smarter clients are looking ahead, and they're actually hiring people who are experienced in contracts, thinking like maybe a contract isn't like a 5-year thing. I mean, who knows anything 5 years from now? So, how do we get more reviews and, adjustments and or like scales going in our contracts so that we can, make sure that we're better aligned. So I think one thing I would see clients doing, the smarter ones anyway, are jumping into like, what contracts do we have in place? What are we committed to here? How do we get with customers and suppliers quickly to redesign some of these so it can be successful? It's always possible to go to a customer or a supplier with like, here's the situation. Let's talk about a win-win to be successful together. That's one thing I'm seeing.
And shipping is the place where it's come to light the most and the first, really, isn't it? Because shipping slots were hard to get, containers were hard to get, shipping rates are going up all the time. That's where it's sort of manifested in its first instance, and now it's starting to flow through to the rest of the parts.
Well, you're right, David, that the shipping rates and the ocean freight is ridiculous. So basically, folks are having to reevaluate that and maybe just like resource simply because they can no longer survive with this craziness. They're going to have to, in the US, they have to look at Mexico, Canada, the US, how are you going to come back to somewhere where you can, be closer to your customer?
Oh.
So since we only have a few minutes left, maybe what we'll do is like, I'll have a concluding thought from each of us. And I would just summarize what we've said so that you guys have takeaways. One is the folks who have been most successful managing the pandemic and also are going to thrive post-pandemic seem to have a good handle on their cash, and they are finding ways to have access to cash, whether they, it's cash or it's loans, it's something so that they can grow. Also, we talked about communication and collaboration, which really is absolutely critical. And we're finding that, what can be more important than that when we're talking about supply chain partners. Technology, utilizing technology so we can gain better visibility. We talked about talent. Probably should be number one that I mentioned. I'm just going in order, but the talent is like, if you don't have that, you may as well just hang it up, as everyone on this expert panel has said. And then we also talked about innovation, and we were talking a bit about how to handle inflation, which is definitely happening. And as Evan said, well, as everything else, there's supply and demand. Growing demand's not such a problem if you have growing supply. Growing inflation is not so bad if you have growing wages. So like, how are we going to be in alignment or are we not? And how are we going to make sure we do that? So that's what I would say as far as the, what we've concluded. And with that said, I will, let's see, who wants to go first? Like, let's start with Evan. What do you see as any wrap up points that you'd like to make?
Well, I mean, you guys are talking about how long this thing might last, and you're saying, well into 2022. Mate, I don't think we're going to be allowed out of my country until June 2022.
That's sad, Evan.
That's right. That's right.
That's why we're talking down here. So I'm going to suggest to you that this is, this has got a couple of years in it for us, no question. And so, therefore, speed at the boardroom to set the strategy and speed of communicating that to the front line is critical, because you're going to be resetting yourself every 90 days in my book. It's changed dramatically in the 4 90-day stints we've had since this thing hit, and I can see that going for the next 8. So those that are slow will die. Those that are fast will win.
Simple as that, huh? I tend to agree. Yeah. How about you, David? Any concluding thoughts?
Only that, the business 101 aspects that I harp on about all the time are the things that the basic disciplines in the businesses are the things that are letting those down at the moment. So if we're looking for the speed, right, we need to make sure that we have the visibility of the information that we need. We need to be across all of those things. We need to be able to, in order to get speed in the business, you've got to be able to see what's going on. You've got to have the right measures in place. And this all gets back to the very much the 101 things about your culture, your dashboards that you have in place, how you manage those things. It's all business 101. You get that in alignment, you take out the waste, you get the process moving, you get the visibility and the velocity, you can handle this.
Yep, absolutely. All right, how about you, Karen?
I think that what's really going to be important going forward is the notion that we're not going back to anything. So I think that some companies have the mistaken notion they're waiting for, even the new normal. However, it's not really going to be normal in any way, shape, or form. So I think from a leadership perspective, companies have got to think differently. When we were talking about innovation and we were talking about being resourceful, I think it requires a very different mindset. And the mindset to say, not that you're waiting, you're looking around, you're seeing what's going on now, what you can predict that's coming down the pike, and you are changing how you're operating, how you're thinking, how you're developing your people and preparing for reality, not for something you wish may return or come back, but what's really happening. So I think that great leaders, they see that and they step out and walk into it and not even be afraid, because you've got talented people, you've got smart people, you've got innovative and creative people. Put them to work on the new situations that we're facing.
Absolutely. How about you, Diane?
Well, I was actually just going to piggyback off Karen's thought, is that this is an exciting time. I mean, it's better than being isolated in our homes and not sure what's going to happen. So I would say well, for those of us who are kind of out and about in the US, I think it's been an exciting few months. And I know soon enough, other countries will catch up with the vaccine rollouts and will open back up. But these are exciting times. So anyone in supply chain, this is the time to shine. You have lots of opportunity, lots of growth, lots of innovation ideas that you can come up with. So this is the time to kind of exercise and express all of that. So it's exciting.
Well said. Yes.
Well, and I would wrap that up with forward thinking. I mean, everyone's been talking about that, but if you think about what we've been talking today and then relate it back to Operation Warp Speed. Operation Warp Speed was about thinking ahead. So what did they do? They built factories before we knew we had a vaccine that was like going to be approved at all. We set up distribution networks. I mean, we just spent a bunch of money. So you had to have money to do all this. So, forward thinking is how the vaccine got delivered in a extremely fast way, to Evan's point, compared to what has ever happened in the past. So we need to find ways to do that repetitively in all of our companies. And I think we'll definitely be successful. So I guess I'd wrap it up by saying forward thinking. And with that said, I would like to make sure that we ask you to, we're going to post this archive on the Society for the Advancement of Consulting's website under the Supply Chain SIG. And we're also going to post it on the Association for Supply Chain Management, or APICS, Inland Empire's website under the Emerging with Supply Chain Strength webinar series, so that you can check it out. I think it's been a fabulous engaging discussion here. So definitely lots of tips, and we hope that you have a very successful remainder of 2021, but be forward thinking. Let's think about 22 and 23, 25 even. All right, well, thank you, and we'll join us next time for our webinar, and thanks to the panelists.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you, everybody.